Thank you very much for coming. I thought I should have this periodic press conference after what has happened in Somalia. It has been a truly momentous achievement in Somalia by the Somali people and all supporters of Somalia for ending the transition in a manner that was successful and peaceful. Ending the transition was momentous because this was a success story which Somalia has not witnessed in the past 21 years. It was possible to end the transition with 4 major accomplishments. The first one was the adoption provisionally of the Constitution. The second was the convening of a new parliament. The third was the election of a president who in many ways does represent a very fundamental change in the leadership of the country. This is significant not only because it was peaceful, but by no means easy, but it showed the integrity of the process through the roadmap. A roadmap which was signed in September 2011, following the signing of the Kampala Accord in June last year. The roadmap was a different framework that brought success and forward movement to the peace process after previous failures to similar attempts to form a government. It was a process that did show a measure of representation and legitimacy. The legitimacy was brought by the convening of the elders. In the absence of direct elections, whether to have a referendum on the Constitution or to have direct elections on the government, the main source of legitimacy left was the traditional elders. 135 of them from all over the country were convened in Mogadishu. It was representative because the elders did elect a constituent assembly that had a cross-section of representation with 7 major focal groups. Other elders, other than the traditional elders, women, youth, business community, intellectuals, diaspora, and civil society organization. That is the widest representation one could get through a legitimate process of the elders. But also, the whole process of the roadmap was inclusive from day one. Inclusivity that lacked in the other previous attempts. What do we mean by inclusive? It brought all the major political actors, excluding, of course, the Al-Shabaab. It was the executive, the legislature. After all, you recall the very difficult times around the president and the speaker. It brought in the regions like Puntland, Galmudug. It brought in even movements that were not yet holding territory, such as Al-Sunna al-Jamaa, and it brought the entire civil society. We wished we could bring more, and the door was left open to the Al-Shabaab if they laid out arms. They didn't. But to the extent possible, this was the most inclusive process. And maybe that's why it succeeded. And finally, it was democratic. Those who watched those elections, the ballot boxes, the casting of the votes, the counting, couldn't have been more democratic. I can truly say I've seen many elections in Africa. This one was one of the most democratic, most transparent. That is as much as we can say about what we have gained, and we hope will stick after 22 years. But this was happening against a secure environment. Not only the pushing of Shabab from Mogadishu, but the push of Shabab from other parts of South Central. Meanwhile, the security situation in Mogadishu continued to be very congenial to these kind of political processes. And the pushing out of Shabab from other parts of the country enabled the convening of the elders. Let me also emphasize the power of the cell phone. There are no roads. We could only use the air transport to bring the elders, but that telephone, that cell phone did magic in communicating with elders, and the elders communicating with their respective constituencies. What next? The security situation continues to improve. Thanks to Amisom, thanks to the Somali forces. We have witnessed the capture of Kismayo, which is the last major stronghold of the Shabab. But of course, that doesn't mean the end of Shabab. We can discuss this later. But we have seen a government in the making with all the positive signs. The Somalis and the international community have truly witnessed change. A change that came through a process of integrity, but mainly through the secret ballot. Some of you who might have read my statement 2 days before the elections, I said, use the power of the secret ballot. Between you and the box is only God watching you, and that's when you can make up your mind. And I think that it did deliver. We have already seen the wonderful emerging relationships between the President and the Speaker. We have seen and heard the visionary statements of the President around the 6 pillars of what he intends to do. The pronouncement by the Speaker that there won't be any more acrimonious relationship between the executive and the legislature. And we are witnessing a very close consultative process by this President to nominate a Prime Minister. He has 30 days to complete that process. We are very close to 30 days period. The 10th is just around the corner. We hope we shall get a Prime Minister within the few remaining days. That Prime Minister has to be endorsed by Parliament. Then he should proceed to form a government, which also has to be endorsed by Parliament. The next steps are what? If we read from the 6 points, we can take cue from what we should be anticipating to be the priorities of this government. The first one is political. What do I mean by political? This government has to establish a new government. But there have been governments that have come and gone, and some have collapsed. But the President has said he wants a new, qualitatively different government that is accountable, that is transparent, that is efficient. And around the government, there must be institutions. Not only ministries, but other institutions that are associated with the government. So a good government with a good governance. The other aspect of the political objective is to continue the process of political reach out and reconciliation. We did what we could in the roadmap, but now there are new areas that have been recovered with large swaths of population. Those people must be brought into the new political system or dispensation. But that political outreach and reconciliation is not only to the normal populations, the civilians. This president has said he'll be looking into the possibilities of reaching out to elements of the Al-Shabaab. I've heard from him one of the most thorough analytical breakdown of who is who in Shabaab, the various categories, and how he would proceed to reach out to some of these groups politically. The prospect may be better as the security situation and their military strength has been degraded, as we know. So that political agenda must also include that particular group which remain outside the political dispensation and the political process of the roadmap. The second goal which he has said, and we should be anticipating, is related to the political reach out and reconciliation, that is stabilization of the newly recovered areas. Stabilization has many aspects. It includes establishment of law and order. Security is important. Stabilization also means establishment of local administrations and regional administrations. Stabilization means the delivery of basic services, which includes law and order and justice, water, points, health, those basic things that the people need. When I met him a few hours after he was sworn in, the president said, it's the needs of the people that will determine and dictate his leadership. He rightly says so. We know he comes from that background. He comes from civil society background. He comes from institutions that reach out to people, mainly through education. So basic services are among those that must go to stabilization. Let me dwell a little bit more on the stabilization in relationship to security. Because on this one, he has said priorities: security, security, security. No wonder he had to emphasize that because of the attempted assassination just 48 hours after he came to power. And this would mean not only reaching the accepted ceilings for Amisom, but the creation of the Somali forces. Military, police, correctional, and the justice system. We in the UN have to respond to this. The Secretary General has already had 2 phone calls with the President, and he has agreed with him that the UN will begin with peace building in Somalia. And peace building also includes state building and all the aspects of stabilization, which I said. In peace building, there is a role for every UN agency, fund, and program. The UN is also looking at possibilities of establishing what the Secretary General has called a heavy footprint in Somalia, from a light footprint to a heavy footprint, where the entire UN system has to be physically in Somalia, like my office, ANPOS, has been since the beginning of the year. In New York last week, there was a summit, mini summit on Somalia, which the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon convened on the sidelines of the General Assembly. We were overwhelmed by the response of the international community. In a 2-hour session where participants were invited to speak for not more than 10 minutes, they spoke and spoke. And at the end of the 2 hours, there were still 15 people or nations, governments, and heads of state who couldn't speak because there wasn't time. The president himself spoke by video, stayed for the 2 hours, listening to the international community expressing solidarity and willingness to support the new Somalia and his government. The UN will begin an internal strategic review of its strategies, objectives, priorities in response to what the government has already outlined and which will be concretized as the government is being formed. And we think this is another opportunity to help Somalia, to facilitate change in Somalia, which everybody has been waiting for. It may be more difficult, it may be more challenging. We have moved from transition to transformation, which entails peace building. Around it is state building. These are the challenges we are facing. Let me stop here. You may wish to ask questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll now take questions from the floor. I'd ask that you identify yourself and what organization you're with before you ask your question. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Mahiga, it's good you came at the right time when Kismayo is apparently in the hands of Amisom troops, or let's call it Kenyan troops and Amisom troops. Can you kindly just paint a picture, the current picture of Kismayo, and tell us what plans you have in the pipeline to ensure that especially civilians are not harmed and the security officials do not behave as we have been hearing in other countries once a place like that falls? Number two, are there plans to, I remember one time you said here that there is always room for Al-Shabaab. If we have Al-Shabaab and they are coming to surrender or they're willing to team up with the government in Mogadishu, are you willing to welcome them? And then after that, what helped the new Somali government now that you have fought a big battle like a Trojan and ensured that things that are happening there have just happened and paving the way for what we can call a good transition to a good governance?
Shall I?
Yeah.
Or wait?
No, I think go ahead.
Kismayo security. Amisom, led by the Kenyan forces, have captured Kismayo. It was a well-planned military operation. A combined air, land, and sea operation. Well executed, well commanded. But as they were moving in, we heard that Al-Shabaab was, they putified, but the others were moving out. To go where? Shabaab elements, especially the foreign elements, have gone across the Indian Ocean somewhere to the Gulf countries. The Somalis, who are the majority, have remained. Others have shed their combat and mixed with the population. Others have moved to other parts of Somalia, like Puntland and Somaliland. Others are probably in the forest, in the rural areas. For those who have mingled with the population, it becomes quite a challenge because they may want to undertake guerrilla, maybe, of course, most likely, terrorist action. And this has always been quite a challenge to military operations. It was in Mogadishu, it was in Baidoa, it will be in Kismayo. But the military have over the years really performed so well and understood their methods of approach in the protection of civilians. I don't know exactly the nature of the reports that are coming out, but we have received repeated assurances that the safety of the civilians will be guaranteed. But I was trying to explain how complex the situation has emerged as the Shabab is melting into the civilian population. Some human rights groups have actually even acknowledged, with the Amisom as a whole, how over the past 2 years they have improved their ways of protecting civilians. And as we call on all sides to protect civilians and ensure humanitarian access, I think this remains as the guiding principles. And I hope this will be followed not only in the taking of Kismayo, but also in pursuing the Shabab beyond Kismayo. On the political outreach, as I said, this is primarily the responsibility of the Somali government. I said before, and repeatedly so, that the Security Council had repeatedly issued appeals and calls to the Shabab to lay down their arms, to renounce violence, and join the peace process. They didn't. Maybe this time, with a significant shift in the military and security situation, they would. And with a new leadership that, as I said, seemed to have a very in-depth understanding of the profile of the Shabab leadership, rank and file, the prospects for an extended political outreach could be better.
Peter Grester from Al Jazeera. You mentioned in passing the need to wind back Amisom's role in Somalia as you improve the ability of the Somali security services to take over security. I'm just wondering, do you have a plan in mind? Is there a strategy that foresees the withdrawal of Amisom troops from Somalia? And the second question is that you clearly personally had a very strong role to play in the transitional phase. I'm just wondering now what role your office sees itself playing within the new Somali government from here on.
There is still work to be done. The capture of Kismayo is one of the last major cities, but as I said, the challenge from a degraded Al-Shabaab may continue. We have seen it in Mogadishu. They do what they are best at. Terrorists, bombs, devices, suicide bombs, roadside bombs. That is likely to continue. Guerrilla warfare, maybe. But guerrilla warfare, you have to have the population backing you, and there is a special type of a military approach which we haven't seen out of Shabab. More conventional warfare, maybe in some parts of Somalia. So there'll still be a military threat, put it that way. But the future of Amisom certainly will depend on the discussion by the Security Council. On the 16th of this month, the African Union and the Amisom were providing a report to the Security Council. I think the future configuration and role of Amisom will be clarified by the Security Council. There is certainly increasing discussion on building up the Somali forces. And this is an issue which the Security Council will also continue to be seized, and the international community to support the efforts of building. And I think this is a time when the Amisom role in Somalia must be seen in relationship to the building up of the Somali forces, or an eventual exit strategy for Amisom, but which may not come today or tomorrow, so long as the military threat continues. Our role, as I said, the United Nations as a whole is going through a strategic review, which begins at the end of this month. It's not only my office, but the UN as a whole will have to re-examine its next strategy to respond to the defined and chosen vision and strategies of the new government. Revising such a strategy is not only done by my office, it will be done in collaboration with the other UN agencies, funds, and programs. It will be done in collaboration with the African Union, IGAD. It will be done in collaboration with our major partners. And between now and the 29th of October, these consultation processes are taking place in Nairobi and in New York. In November, recommendations will be submitted to what we call the Policy Committee of the Secretary General and his senior Under-Secretary Generals in New York, and a report with the various options will be submitted to the Security Council before the end of December. That will define the future of the UN, including UNPOS. There will definitely be a role for UNPOS. UNPOS now is in Mogadishu, is in Garowe, is in Hargeisa. UNPOS will need to be in Baidoa, in Beltwayne, in Kismayo. Peace building, which is really the flagship policy of the Secretary General for Somalia, entails a very significant engagement by UN agencies on the ground, including the political role of my office. The Constitution was adopted. It is a provisional. Elections will have to be organized in the 4 years. Political parties will have to be formed. And all this entail political input and facilitation. So around that strategic review, the role of future UNPOS will emerge, and we will be glad to share with you by January next year.
In the back.
Daniel Osangula from AFP. Just two questions. With the withdrawal of the Shabab from Kismayo, definitely there's been a vacuum created in terms of leadership and the power structure. Does your office, probably in conjunction with Amisom, have any plans to integrate the different clan interests that have plagued Kismayo for so long into creating a leadership for the port city? And secondly, with the adaptation of guerrilla warfare by Al-Shabaab, is there a possibility maybe of Amisom and KDF forces turning their stay in the country into an occupation just to keep the peace?
When I said of the change of stabilization, you may take Kismayo as a microcosm of stabilization. In the political and administrative area, it will be necessary to establish an administrative and political presence in Kismayo. But that is first and foremost the responsibility of the Somali and the Somali government. You are quite right, there are many clan dynamics that need to be understood and need to be accommodated. And I think this is high on the agenda of the new president and his coming government. It may certainly be a very challenging exercise, but we have seen it happen in other recovered areas like Baidoa, Gedo, and other towns. So I hope this will be necessary. But what happens in Kismayo will inform what needs to be done in other newly recovered areas by way of stabilization in all its different manifestations: administration, political, security, services. So this is definitely going to be an area where the government will be engaged with. Guerrilla warfare, as I said, I think the militaries are in a better position to deal with the remnants of the Shabab in the South Central and even in the North. What I pointed out, for those who may know the distinction between a terrorist warfare and guerrilla warfare, you can begin to see when and how and its feasibility, whether this can happen or not. But I don't want to get into that. It is up to the militaries to be able to define. It's not only the strategy, but also the kind of weapons that you may need. But let's really hope that it is the political that will take precedence, and then see how both the political strategy and the security strategy can be made. But a corner has been turned in relationship to dealing with the Shabab on the ground.
In the front, please. Hold on.
Alim Tenzi, BBC. There is this meeting in Karen, which is going on, which is discussing the administrative issues for Kismayo. I don't know whether you can tell us anything about that meeting, which we understand it has caused a lot of tension right now, that some clans have been invited and others are not. So kindly tell us about that meeting. And then secondly, if possible, you can give us a brief in Kiswahili also.
Kiswahili, yes, I will do it after this. About this meeting, and frankly, I just came back yesterday, really, from New York. I haven't been fully briefed about this meeting in Karen, but I knew even before I left that there was basic questions that are being asked. You know, what next in Kismayo? What next maybe in Juba? And it could be part of that exercise to answer that question. And in whatever happens, I'm sure the Somali government will take the lead in this and try to see how the different stakeholders are engaged. That area, not only Kismayo, but that whole area has probably one of the most complex clan mixes in Somalia, and would entail consultations, negotiation, discussions, and we hope that will yield useful results sooner than later.
Swahili afterwards.
Yeah, Swahili afterwards, yeah. That's what I said.
Just a small clarification in English, kindly. Very small clarification arising from the other questions. Correct?
Go ahead, just getting you the microphone.
Mr. Mahiga, be succinct. I know you have little time to talk to the press here in Kiswahili. Can you now tell the world, when should they send diplomats to Mogadishu? When should visitors start going to Mogadishu? 3, are you talking to AU to ensure that at least they send troops that they have been, if I can use that word, singing to send there from African countries for a long time until they left to Amisom? Don't you see that the troops that are there, 17,000, are few, given, as you said at the outset, we have a guerrilla war? And lastly, you see Somali becoming or having a semblance of peace before the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, in the next how many years?
There is certainly unimaginable change in Somalia from a war situation to an increasing peaceful situation. When I first went to Mogadishu 2 years ago, I was in a military truck. The distance from the airport to Villa Somalia is a few kilometers, maybe 6-7 kilometers. The only person I could see crossing the street was either a woman carrying some food, crossing the station but running, or a child, I don't know, trying to cross the street. Otherwise, everything was shut. The only thing in wheels I could see were military trucks, and occasionally a donkey cart pulling some supplies in that whole stretch. You look at the building, there wasn't a single building that did not have, let alone bullet holes and pots, but had been destroyed. When I was sitting with the president, talking to him for 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, from minute 1 to minute finish, it was just sounds of guns. And guns of different caliber. Small guns, big booms, whatever. And you just have to sit there. You have to do some work. Then you leave. You don't know how you leave, and you know, my security people, they put you back in the truck and all that. That was. Today, honestly, the streets are full of human beings. There's traffic jam similar to what I see traveling from here to the town center. Construction and repair work is going. The sound of hammers and all this has replaced the sound of guns and all that. I see young men and women walking in the streets of Mogadishu well beyond 8 o'clock to, I don't know, 10 o'clock. There are shopping areas in Mogadishu that you can buy things that you can buy here, coming from Dubai at this price. So there is really normalization, at least in Mogadishu, and I hope this continues in the other areas. The ambassadors that are there, apart from the United Nations, there is Turkey, there is the League of Arab States, there is Sudan, there is Djibouti, there is Ethiopia. There are more coming. I know the British and the Italians are renovating, they have acquired buildings. So more embassies are coming. When can people go? The African Express, the East African, I don't know which area, they are full daily, either going in, going out. Not to mention the international flights from the Gulf and the international flights from Ankara, from Istanbul, and more are coming. In the UN planes, I used to go with the little charter planes with my assistants. Now, whether it is Anhas or Unsoa, they are full to capacity daily. So I can say this is, and from Mogadishu, you can now go to Baidoa, you can go to Garowe. So let me even joke. I was in Tanzania 3 weeks ago, and some of my relatives said, we hear there are up-to-date kanga. Kanga are these dresses the women wear. They say in Mogadishu, we hear they are much better than anything you can get here. Can you get us pairs of kanga from Mogadishu? So I said, sure, this is what it is. So I can say peace is really coming fast. It's not only Mogadishu, but also beyond. And we just have to hold our, And that's why the significance of this peace process is different from other peace process, because it has really brought the peace. The diaspora is coming. The investment that are in Mogadishu, during the height of the crisis, the yearly remittances from the Somali diaspora was 1.6 billion. And that is what kept the Somali household and families resilient, more than anything that can come from a single country. Now, with peace, what I see every week, he's a witness, we see sets of buildings that are new. Sometimes I tell the drivers, I say, today let us take back roads. Maybe what we see is the main road. You go through the back roads, you see the same kind of construction going on. What more can I say? Really, this is a quantum change in 18 months and improving. So I think you are invited to visit.
We're running short on time, so what I'm going to do is take a couple of questions quickly, and I'd like to start with one of our Somali colleagues, just here in the blue shirt. If you could be brief, so I can give as many people a chance as possible.
I'm Muhammad Ahmed from Somali National TV and Radio Mogadishu. In time of Stabilization, there is a lot of Somali journalists that have been killed the past months of this year. Only 15 journalists have been killed the past 10 months of this year. So what the role of your office, the safety of the Somali journalists? Are Amisom and TFG forces are responsible for the safety of TFG officials and the others only? Thank you.
If we could pass to the woman in the back, please.
My name is Sarah. I work for South African Broadcasting Corporation. There are reports that Kismayo was hit without the knowledge of the Mogadishu administration, that is President Mahmoud. Is that true? And if it is, was it strategic?
Now can we go to the front over here, please?
My name is Javier Triana from the Spanish FA News Agency. You just said that peace is coming fast. What about food? What does Sampos know about the humanitarian situation in the towns? Well, I guess it varies from town to town, but what does Sampos know about the towns recently taken from the hands of Al-Shabaab?
Go ahead, sir. Sure.
Okay. You know, there was a spate of the killing of journalists. We counted from the beginning of the year to the most recent, I don't know, I think it's close to 10, 15 or more. And for every killing that has been executed, we have issued statements to the point where sometimes I was falling short of words so that I don't repeat the same statement of condemnation. But where does this come from? First of all, it is targeted killings of journalists. And we were wondering whether these journalists who are being targeted by Shabab or are being targeted by some criminal agents or are being targeted by, I don't know, elements that we don't know. Because at the end of every statement we have issued to condemn, we used to say we want investigation to be done. There was no investigation. UNPOS said we are ready to facilitate investigation so that action can be taken. I have personally visited some of the journalists in hospital who really had a narrow escape. And this continues to be a major concern, not only to us or to UNPOS, but to the international community and the other journalists. I want to see this as a pattern of spoiler behavior, to silence. And it could come not only from Shabab, but even the agents of the spoilers, who we have always condemned and suspected, who don't want change. It could be killings that are meant to spread fear, but why journalists? But I understand there are also others that are not journalists that have also been targeted. And one thing, let me remind you, in a post-conflict situation, where investigation, police capacity, courts do not exist, it's very difficult really to overcome these phases. The only way we can do is to continue to denounce and to enhance the security. It may not be possible to put an Amisom soldier behind every journalist. And the journalists, by their very nature, they want their independence and they want to go around. So let's hope with the law and order and courts, which are now the declared goals of this new administration, and our collective voices will continue to talk against this kind of actions. Kismayo, I don't know. How could Mogadishu not know? They have their own soldiers there. The government, now is no longer the TFG, has Somali forces fighting with the Amisom forces. So they should know. And even when I was traveling, I was reading that every town is falling. You seem to, even outside the world, you know that there is, this step is followed by that step, this step is followed by that step. Now, if there are certain military ways, that I don't know, but it was common knowledge, in fact, with the impatience, that when is it coming, when is it coming, and everybody was eager to know. So I really don't know what exactly you may mean, that it was hit without the knowledge. I think the military colleagues would be in a better position to answer this. Return to normalcy. First of all, we have to thank the international community for putting under control the serious famine that we witnessed in Somalia at the end of last year. It was brought under control in a relatively short period with a massive injection of assistance. But it's true that food and the weather, combined with food shortages because of access and transport, and the fragility and the vagaries of weather may interfere with the production of food. Some of the IDPs, internally displaced persons, have not yet returned to their areas. Some roads have not been opened. Humanitarian work continues from the international community and from within the country. One thing that always strikes me, I am surprised. When I go to a place like Jaraaid, I see fresh produce. Then I ask, where did this come from? They say, from the South Central. Somalis are so enterprising that they can move food from some parts of the country to another. Afgoye is like the garden on the suburbs of Mogadishu. And every time I am in the cafeteria, I say, where did this watermelon or where did these mangoes come from? And because some stuff is imported, they say, no, this is from Afgoye, which means there is internal movements of food. But the IDPs are still there. And I think this is one of the ways that we have to improve delivery of food to the IDPs and assistance. And one of the declared objectives of this president is that the whole issue of creating a conducive environment for the return of IDPs internally and eventually the return of the refugees from neighboring countries is one of his top priorities. And the humanitarian work has to continue. There are still 1.5 million people in Somalia in need of humanitarian assistance. And the challenge is access, but I hope access would improve with more roads opening up, with the containment of the Shabab fighters.